Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Our DJ Tolliver is here as well. And Tolliver, what a week of news. It has been so much going on. We could really go anywhere with this show right now. But we did do a live special earlier this week following the news of the capture of the Venezuelan President Nicholas Maduro, which is relevant to our topic this hour because Maduro is a socialist, and that word socialism means different things to different people, and that's what we're talking about this hour, what socialism means to you, our listeners. But first, Tolliver, we have to welcome some new listeners.
Yeah, we want to welcome the people of South Dakota listening across the state on South Dakota Public Broadcasting and also Iowa Public Radio. Welcome to The Middle. I love Des Moines. If you haven't been, you got to go.
And what about Ames? What about Mason City? All right, well, great to be on the air across both of those states. Now, I mentioned Maduro, who is a socialist. In this country, we have democratic socialists who believe that some key industries should be run for the public good, not by authoritarian means, but rather through democracy. That's people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders. Those are democratic socialists. So is the new mayor of our largest city, Zoran Mamdani, in New York.
We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. If our campaign demonstrated that the people of New York yearn for solidarity, then let this government foster it.
Now, before Mamdani was elected, President Trump and other Republicans were calling him a communist, which he is not. But this hour, we're asking, what does socialism mean to you? Is it something you want, or is the idea itself a bridge too far in the United States of America? You can call in at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. We're going to get to your calls in just a moment. But first, earlier this week, as we said, we asked for your thoughts on the U.S. involvement in Venezuela following the capturing of Nicolas Maduro. Here are some of the voicemails that came in.
Hi, my name's Jake, and I'm calling from Denver, Colorado. I think what's going on right now in Venezuela is an egregious overstepping of international law. I don't understand how we can just kidnap a president overseas and then say we're overtaking their oil and we're going to sell it.
My name's William. I'm calling from Vermont. I'm really grateful that President Trump captured their illegitimate president because Venezuelans are crying out for freedom and liberty and freedom from tyranny. And Nicolas Maduro only represents the worst of what Latin America has to offer.
My name is Nadia. I'm calling from Texas. I think that the situation in Venezuela is scary. While I agree and I completely understand why Venezuelans want Maduro out of office, I think it's terrifying that our president is able to invade a sovereign country and kidnap their leader.
Thanks to everyone who called in. As always, you can hear that whole show by subscribing to The Middle wherever you get your podcasts. So now to our topic this hour. What does socialism mean to you? Tolliver, tell people how they can reach us.
You can call us at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
On YouTube. Joining us this hour, Micah Uetricht, an editor at Jacobin magazine and co-author of the book Bigger Than Bernie, How We Go from the Sanders Campaign to Democratic Socialism. Micah, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Tomas Philipson is joining us as well, an economist at the University of Chicago who served as an acting chair of the Council of Economic Advisors in the first Trump administration. Thomas, welcome to you.
Good to be with you guys.
Okay, so let me start by asking each of you what socialism means to you. And Thomas, I'll start with you first.
Well, in my view, socialism means compulsion. You're forcing people to do something that they wouldn't do voluntarily, meaning you take their wealth from some people and give to other people, or you regulate them in ways that are not voluntarily undertaken. So it's a matter of force, and if you don't comply, obviously there's consequences. You might go to jail, you might get fined, etc. But it's ultimately about forced activity as opposed to voluntary activity.
Micah, what do you see as socialism?
Socialism, and to me in particular, democratic socialism, the kind of socialist that I am, is about expanding democracy into realms beyond the political. In the political realm, in the United States, we claim that we believe that democracy is an inherent good, that people have the right to govern themselves. We don't like authoritarian strongmen as our leaders, as much as that may be being eroded in the moment, but this is sort of in the DNA of the founding of this country. Democratic socialists say that the people, the vast majority of the people who make up this country and the world, should have a say also in our economy, which is the realm that governs their lives. You're not able to be truly free unless you have the provision of basic economic goods like housing, and also goods like education and healthcare, and that these are essential to living a free life and a dignified life. And that vision of a free and dignified life for all people is really at the core of what socialism is all about.
Micah, where do you see an example of democratic socialism working the way that you want it to work?
Well, Karl Marx frequently wrote about, not writing recipes for the cook shops of the future. I think that we have to figure out in real time what what a socialist society in somewhere like the United States would look like through democratic, trial and error and engagement with people. But I certainly think that the European social democracies, places like Norway and Sweden, while far from perfect and while decaying in many parts of their social democratic welfare states, are countries that have gone the furthest in creating a relative level of egalitarianism, of creating public goods that all people can access for free or for cheap. Again, these societies, not that they don't have problems, but that they've made things like public education, higher education available to people, in some cases capped out of control housing costs. There are many, and democratic socialists like myself, I will say, and democratic socialists like Zoran Mamdani are particularly interested in this moment in focusing on instances, particular goods that places like Sweden have accomplished and that should be achievable here in the United States, the wealthiest country in the history of the human race.
Well, and
there are plenty of examples like that we can turn to and implement here.
Thomas, isn't there already a pretty high level of socialism that exists in the United States when you think about Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP benefits, public education, subsidies for farmers and other industries?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. We have large redistribution programs. I think they're, if you look at the biggest federal expenditures, Social Security, Medicare, and defense, essentially, that are the defense. I don't think anyone is arguing with. I don't think people like me either argue with that. If you're out of luck, you shouldn't have people helping you through the public sector. The big problem with socialism many times is that they want to treat everyone the same, and that's a problem that runs through Medicare and Social Security in the U.S. A lot of Medicare and Social Security goes to people who we don't need the government essentially to take care of them. There's no reason why people in the upper half of the income distribution should pay taxes to be forced to save through the Social Security system, which is essentially a forced savings program that you have to participate in, essentially. And there's no reason why rich people should pay taxes and then get a very bad return on that, essentially, through the government. Which isn't the reason, though?
Isn't the reason, Thomas, the part of the reason for that when you do it like that and everybody gets it, for example, with Social Security, that it doesn't come off like a welfare system. It's just you're paying in, you take out.
Yeah, but it's large, very large negative consequences of that, because you need to have large taxes to basically payroll taxes on the young that gets paid to the old. We have a pay-as-you-go system for Medicare and Social Security. So payroll taxes on the young are very high to basically hand out a bunch of Medicare and Social Security checks to rich people or the upper part of income distribution. And when we should have potentially a means-tested program. I think people like me are not against taking care of the unlucky and poor, essentially. But what socialism many times entails is that everyone should be treated the same and everyone should participate in the public sector. And that many times grows the welfare state to levels where the taxation needed to support that has a lot of negative consequences.
Micah, how do you respond to that?
A program like Medicare and Social Security, to me, these are programs that everyone pays into throughout the course of their lifetime as an indication of a system that we all have a stake in as a collective body, as people who live in this country together, who are paying into a system that we all then have a financial stake in, and that can support people. I mean, the fact that rich people pay into it, they also, of course, get paid out of it when they are retiring, but they're also contributing to a system that can allow for, I mean, in the case of Medicare, a program, or Social Security programs that have done wonders in providing health care for people who are retirees, older people, done amazing things, Social Security, reducing the levels of poverty of people who are of retirement age. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, again, the wealthiest country in the history of the human race should be doing, is creating these kinds of universal programs that can cover everybody and can help everyone. And, of course, I don't think that anybody who is wealthy in this country who's paying into Social Security is being bankrupted by those Social Security payments. I mean, they develop a stake in a system that is part of a broader system that everyone has a stake in this country.
A reminder to our listeners, you can reach us at 8444-MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. And Tolliver, a lot of Americans' views about socialism came out of the Cold War.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan, who was president as the Cold War was ending, said socialism only works in two places: heaven where they don't need it, and hell where they already have it. Here's a portion of a speech he gave back in 1988.
We call this idea socialism. Socialists believe humankind would be better off without economic freedom, and so they seek to replace it with rules and regulations. And if there's one tragic lesson the 20th century has taught us, it is that the social engineers cannot tailor the human soul to fit the fashions of the present day, no matter how they try. For the truth is, men cannot design humankind.
Tolliver, as we go to break, what are we listening to here?
This is Billy Bragg with Waiting for the Great Leap Forwards. The original cover art for this album said, "Capitalism is killing music." So I personally would like to be paid per song. Just let you know here now.
We'll try.
We're taking your calls next on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking what socialism means to you. Tolliver, what is the number?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on all social media.
I'm joined by economist Tomas Philipson, who served in the first Trump administration, and Jacobin editor Micah Uetricht. And before we get to the phones, let's just briefly talk about Zoran Mamdani. Thomas, he's the Democratic Socialist mayor of New York. He says he wants to have free buses in New York City. He wants some city-run grocery stores to bring down costs, free childcare, which apparently the governor of New York appears poised to help him accomplish. Do you think he's going to be able to get the things done that he's promised as a Democratic Socialist? Oh, I think you're muted, Thomas.
Okay.
There we go. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think it's going to be tough for him to get his agenda through. But I mean, just the way you phrased the question, I think is misleading for people. Obviously, nothing is free. You're taking from some people and giving to people with kids, essentially, if you have free health care. So I think what I really think, and this is it's going to be an issue in New York for sure with its policies, is that we can argue about socialism as observers or pundits like me or other people. That's kind of irrelevant. What's relevant is the people who are faced with socialism. How do they behave when they're faced with socialism? And it turns out, obviously, that many people leave when we institute socialist policies. So in essence, if you think of a movie, what's the value of a movie? It's how many people want to see it. It's not what the movie critics think about the movie, essentially. And that's what we're engaged with. So when you look at how people actually behave, if you look at internationally, when socialist regimes take power, people want to leave that country, essentially. You have laws against leaving countries that are socialist, the previous Soviet Union, North Korea, what have you, essentially. You set up laws because people want to get out of the country. As opposed to a free country, you have laws against people entering the country in terms of immigration policy. So people leave when you do this. The same is true for essentially states in the United States. We see a lot of movements now between states that have larger taxation and larger governments into states that have smaller taxation and smaller governments. That was essentially accelerated quite a bit in 2017 through the tax reform, which made your state and local taxes not deductible. So you're essentially paying now the full price of living in a local or state government that is very big. And when that happens, you get a lot of movement out of those states. So if you just look at the bottom line is what's the demand of people of being faced with socialism? And it's a clear pattern that proponents have to deal with, I think, in terms of motivating why they think we should like this stuff when people leave it.
Well, and Micah, what do you think about that? And do you think that the reputation of democratic socialism, and obviously people are not going to be stopped from leaving New York City if they want to, but the reputation of democratic socialism is going to rest on the success or failure of Mamdani in New York?
Yeah, I haven't heard Zoran make any proposals for, escape from New York style. Nobody gets to leave the island of Manhattan. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. Zoran is the biggest socialist electoral breakthrough in the United States in a very, very long time. Maybe a century, depending on how you count it. And I think all eyes are going to be on him. And I think that despite all of the kind of fear-mongering rhetoric about who he is and what he believes in, the guy ran on a pretty moderate platform. He said, 3 core things were at the heart of his agenda: fast and free buses, freezing the rent for rent-stabilized tenants, and also talked about city-owned grocery stores. These are kind of pretty moderate proposals that he is putting forward in the city, and it's not some kind of tearing down of the city's economic and political structure and salting the earth and rebuilding it from the ground up. The fact that we are only 8 days into his administration and we see a big breakthrough on universal child care, another one of his big proposals that he ran on in the campaign. Today there was the big breakthrough on that you mentioned with the governor, Kathy Hochul. So, it might not be so far-fetched that some of these
it did happen. It did happen pretty fast for the governor, who is also a Democrat, to get on board with that. Let's listen to some of our listeners. David is calling in from Adirondack Park, New York. David, what does socialism mean to you?
Well, to me, socialism is one of the most evil forms of government ever devised. All you have to do is look at the history of the Nazi Germany and the Russians under Vladimir Lenin when he deceived them into socialism.
Do you see that as the kind of socialism that is coming to the United States in the form of people like Zoran Mamdani, though?
Yeah, socialism is not democracy or freedom. It's all lies and deceptions until they get in power, and then you find out what it's really all about. They're brilliant psychological brainwashing propagandists. I'll give them that much. But
okay,
I'm
David.
not buying it.
Okay, David's not buying it. Thomas, I imagine you agree to some level with David, or do you think that he's going too far by comparing people to, Nazi Germany?
No, I think that the stretch is when you talk about dictatorships, obviously that's different from socialism. But the key point is that dictators can much more easily rise when you have a centralized government. If you have a completely decentralized economy, you can't have a dictator take over, essentially. So it's not an accident that you go from initial socialism into what's not happening in the U.S. Certainly, which is sort of the North Korean, the USSR, previous Soviet Union, Venezuelan type of regimes. But it usually starts with much more compulsion and whatever you want to call socialism, where you have to comply with the government, and then it leads into something that's much more perverse than in the U.S.
Let's go to Mike in Dallas, Texas. Mike, go ahead. What does socialism mean to you?
Well, I think more of the democratic socialism of the Western European states. I do not see where Russia is socialist. They are not. North Korea is not socialist. The socialist programs that we have in the U.S. Have very well served us. Public roads, interstates, public schools, Social Security, Medicare, national parks. These can all be considered socialist elements, and I think they benefit us. And
doesn't scare
other
you.
Caller, no, it doesn't scare me at all.
Yeah.
I mean, do we want these things to end?
Well, let me ask you one question, Mike. You're in the state of Texas. I mean, is socialist a bad word just across the state of Texas? Could you tell your friends in Texas that you like socialism that's happening in the United States?
It is a bad word, but it's because it's misconstrued. Listening to some of the previous callers, socialism is not communism. Socialism is not dictatorship. Socialism is not an authoritarian state. Those are all very different things. And I think we can all agree that dictatorship and authoritarian states are bad things.
Yeah. Mike, thank you very much for that. Micah, it brings up just the idea of the branding of this. And we remember that it was not that long ago, just a few months ago, that most of the Democratic Party did not want to get behind Zoran Mamdani before it was clear that he was going to win big in New York.
I mean, yes, this is true of the Democratic Party's relationship to democratic socialism as a whole, the way that the party apparatus mobilized against Bernie Sanders in both of his presidential runs. But I think that, like the last caller said, that the kind of public goods that we have in this country, like national parks, like Social Security, like public education, certainly, I mean, people recognize these things as making this country a better and more decent place to live in, and it gives people, in the case of education, a shot to better themselves and to live lives that are full and get skills that they need to succeed in the ways that they want to succeed. And national parks where we say, okay, this is our like collective patrimony here, that we're not going to turn this into big investment opportunities for private companies, that there would be some kind of spoiling of our national parks if we would do that. We want to keep these outside of the hands of the market so that they can be enjoyed by all people. I mean, this is the kind of thinking that is at the heart of the socialist vision, that we can do more of that, and it will make for a better collective life together.
Tolliver, what is coming in at listentothemiddle.com?
Sure, Johannes says, say what you will about socialist Maduro or Chavez, but who did they invade or occupy? Forget labels, pay attention to actions. John says Trump is a socialist because he pushed the government to own shares of large corporations, and he wants to use tariff taxes to give lower income people money.
Wait. I want to hear what Thomas thinks about that. What do you think about that, Thomas? There are a lot of areas where Trump has actually gotten much more involved in the economy than you would think for a Republican.
Well, I'm not for the government owning shares in private companies, so I would be against that position clearly. I think it's just another form of corporate taxation, right? Because you're paying dividends or whatever to the government as opposed to the private shareholders in that company. That doesn't mean that there's not a national security value of having the government involved in industrial policy. But industrial policy I'm generally against because it fails so often when it's implemented. But for national security reasons, I think there's good reasons many times to steer, to impose certain, restrictions on industries. I mean, China is a very, very good example, and he was the first now it's universally agreed that there's a problem with China, essentially, that we, by trading with them, essentially, are supporting a military buildup that we then build our military to fight. It's essentially, so if you have a trade deficit with a country, it's like having a trade deficit with your grocery store. You only buy from your grocery store. You don't sell anything to your grocery store. But if that grocery store hired a hitman to go after you, you probably wouldn't be so interested in buying from that grocery store. And that's kind of the Chinese situation. So I think there's national security rationales for engaging in certain industrial policy, particularly with China, which is an adversary. But I don't think without a lack of a national security rationale that there's a role for the government to take stakes in companies.
All right, let's go to Mark, who's in Chicago. Mark, go ahead. What does socialism mean to you? Mark, you there? Oh, okay. We're going to skip Mark, and we are going to go to Peter in Fort Collins, Colorado. Peter, go ahead with your thoughts about socialism.
Yeah, I would just echo some of what some other folks have been saying about how, in this country, I think, especially growing up as a boomer, it was just drummed into us that the only form of communism or socialism was what we saw in Soviet Russia, North Korea, Eastern Europe. What we really need to start doing is teaching people about what does democratic socialism really look like by looking more closely at countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway. I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in Denmark, and boy, I think they're doing a lot right there.
Peter, thank you for that. And Micah, I will say there's a Pew Research Center poll from 2022 that finds just 36% of Americans have a positive view of socialism. 57% have a positive view of capitalism, but both of those numbers are coming down.
Yeah, and when you poll people about the kinds of policies that democratic socialists in 2026 are pushing for, you hear a very different story. You often see many polls that show, for example, very strong support, including in some polls among Republicans, for a public national health system, Medicare for all type system. When you ask people, is the cost of living out of control and is there government intervention that is needed to help bring it down, people say yes. In New York City, where I live, obviously the cost of living crisis in regards to housing has spiraled far out of control, and people just elected a mayor who calls himself a democratic socialist because the crisis is so bad, and he said that he was going to do something about it. So, there's been a lot of effort in this country to try to demonize the S word, socialism, and try to associate anybody who claims that label as being some kind of evil person who wants to throw you into a gulag. But I think Americans are coming around to the reality that is not the case, and in fact that there is a desperate need in this country for more kind of social democratic interventions in our society at a time of incredibly crushing economic inequality.
For the purposes of not getting FCC violations on this show, the S word is socialism and the F word is fascism. Okay. Right.
Funding.
So let's go to Caroline, who's calling from Milwaukee. Caroline, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much for taking my call. I'm calling from Milwaukee, which is, I'm not sure if most people know, it's the only major American city to have ever elected 3 socialist mayors. And I think it's fascinating and amazing that we can still see the positive effects of that still to this day, even though that was about 100 years ago. So during that, in 30 years of the socialists running Milwaukee, through public health implementations and different public health measures, life expectancy doubled. Okay. We also have still what I believe to be one of the finest public park systems in this country, still alive and well to this day. Summerfest is another wonderful thing that was started by socialists and kind of, evolved into what we have today. But it's still there, and it's still one of the things that makes this city just a fantastic, wonderful place to live. So we see tons of food banks active all year round, not just around the holiday season, like you see in a lot of other cities. It's active all year round. There's a sense of community here.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a perfect city, but there is still a sense of community here. And I have to think, and I have thought multiple times over the last year, that's because of the residual effects of socialism.
History of socialism
in this city.
Yeah, Caroline, thank you very much for that. And I'm glad you brought up 100 years ago, because Tolliver, one of the most prominent socialist politicians in the history of this country, was Eugene Debs, who was actually imprisoned more than 100 years ago in 1918 after delivering an anti-World War I speech.
Yeah, here's a portion of the speech he read to the court during his trial, read by actor David Strathairn from the 2009 Howard Zinn documentary called The People Speak.
There are multiplied thousands of others who, like myself, have come to realize that before we may truly enjoy the blessings of civilized life, we must organize and reorganize society upon a mutual and cooperative basis. I never so clearly comprehended as now the great struggle between the powers of greed and exploitation on the one hand, and upon the other, the rising hosts of industrial freedom and social justice.
And Zoran Mamdani, by the way, quoted Eugene Debs in his victory speech. Tolliver, what are we listening to?
This is the late Venezuelan musician and socialist Ali Primera, who died in 1985. This is his song Tin Marine. He protested against poverty, exploitation, and, you guessed it, U.S. imperialism. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour we're asking what socialism means to you. I'm joined by Jacobin editor Micah Uetricht and Tomas Philipson, an economist at the University of Chicago. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com. And let's go to Ben, who is in St. Petersburg, Florida. Ben, welcome to The Middle. What does socialism mean to you?
Good evening, Jeremy. Socialism to me is, I see it from so my girlfriend is an early education interventionist and a speech language pathologist at a Title I school. So she tells me stories every day of how families in this country, and just even in our county, it's hard for them to survive. And then on top of that, we see the unhoused community here, and how hard it is to try and find affordable living, even in a state like Florida where so many people move every year. It is hard to find somewhere stable, safe, and secure to stay. And I think that's what the government is lacking. Why don't we have the money to feed our children, educate our children, and find money for the unhoused?
Ben, an interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up. And Thomas, it gets me to a question I wanted to ask you, which is, do you think that the rise of popularity of democratic socialism in some places like New York City, but also just across the United States in some ways, is because people feel like capitalism is not working for them, with, the richest 1% just taking more and more of the wealth? I think you're muted again, Thomas. Okay.
When we go to break,
go
I
ahead.
tend to mute. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the key of thinking about the rich billionaires or what have you, is that people miss a central point when they endorse socialism. They think that rich people need to help other people more. That's essentially the grudge that many people raise when you have this huge inequality in income. What that misses is that the most important way you help other people is not in the public sector by redistribution. The most important way you help people is in the private sector. In other words, you only make money when you help other people. And that's very hard for socialists to understand, I think. Because if you look at the rich people who start companies, if you sell something to a consumer that values it more than you're charging them, you're essentially helping that consumer in their life. If you value brushing your teeth every month by $100, but you buy a toothbrush for $5, that's 90% of the value goes to the customer as opposed to the company of that activity. In addition, most of the sale of the company goes to paying wages for people, other people, again, helping other people, in this case, workers. So the share of activity, the share of labor of the rich that goes to other people have estimated this as economists. It's around 95% of their blood, sweat, and tears that they put into these companies that helps other people, much larger than the progressive tax rates of any socialist regime, essentially. So capitalism is essentially the only mechanism we know. It's not perfect, but it's the best mechanism we know of lifting people out of poverty historically. Socialism has exactly done the opposite, and it's basically caused a lot of despair around the world.
Yeah.
So if you think about how you help the poor, essentially, that has been helped by these rich people. And increased inequality is occurring because globalization. So if you start a tech company today, you are spreading around the world very quickly with your new innovation. So you're not only helping people at home, you're helping people abroad. You're becoming a billionaire because you are helping people. We want more billionaires because what they collect is tiny relative to the value they create for others by becoming billionaires.
I feel like some of our listeners may disagree, but Micah, I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I see the issue slightly differently. Over the past half century, we have lived under a system in this country that has said that basically the ultra wealthy should have no shackles on them, that we should be cutting their tax rates, that we should be smashing unions to make sure that their pesky workers aren't making big demands on them, that we should be cutting budgets, and that we should really set the power of the free market free in this country. And what have we seen over the past half century as that has been implemented? We've seen incredibly yawning gaps in between the rich and the poor. We see ultra wealthy class that seemingly has a bottomless appetite for more and more and more and more, and doesn't care that there are people who are a growing number of impoverished people in this country, that housing for average people is becoming more and more affordable, that people can't afford childcare. That they would rather, you know, in the case of someone like Jeff Bezos, be blasted off into outer space so that they can have a joyride up in the past the Earth's atmosphere, than have to, you know, dedicate the resources that they have gathered from the work of other people, of the people who work for them in their corporations.
They might say that they're blasting off into outer space so they can find us a home for when we destroy the planet.
I mean, I guess when they're finished destroying the planet. I mean, the point that I'm making here is that we've really set rich people free to take as much from the rest of society as they want and not give very much back over the past half century. And it hasn't worked very well, and it has left large numbers of people in this country open to an alternative form of organizing our political and economic system because they don't feel like this one is serving them quite well.
Let me hear from a couple of our listeners. Jonathan is calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Jonathan, go ahead. Your thoughts on socialism. What does it mean to you?
Well, I think that socialism does not exist. You know, the world has changed. You're looking at post-Cold War world and now. So I was telling the guy I called to that we have two main systems: a capitalist market economy, which we practice in the U.S., and then we have a corrupt command economy, which are in the poor countries and the dictatorships. But one thing is consistent. There's a lot of inequality in America, and there's a lot of inequality in Russia. The oligarchs are the people running the show in Russia and other poor countries, and the ultra-rich are the people running the show here. And one point I wanted to make when the last speaker before this, the one who spoke before me, right? You cannot have rich people without poor people. So this idea that the millionaires have their sweat is false. They are fed on the majority poor. So finally, I'll make two quick points. Germany is not a socialist country. But if you look at the German system, they have a grocery store in America called Aldi's. Aldi's is the only grocery chain in the U.S. that pays more than $20 an hour. Walmart does not do it. Target does not do it. An Aldi's manager can afford to buy a house in Minnesota and pay $1,500 a month mortgage, period. It's not about redistribution of wealth. One part is greedy, another is not greedy. Yeah. So finally, we have a system where a lot of Americans have not traveled. People talk of socialism and they've not been to London before. It was an issue during the Obamacare conversation. I told my friends.
You think people don't you're saying that people don't maybe understand the terminology that we're talking about here. Interesting point. Let me go to Jim, who is in Hartford, Connecticut. Jim, what about you? What does socialism mean to you?
Hi. So I want to kind of take off where that other fellow was just talking, because to me, it's not socialism. The idea is a social safety net. So Let that idea ring in there. And then how would I want government to participate? Well, think about Medicare. Government's not doing it all. It's not giving it all, but government sets up the rules and then gets the private industry to participate. So that's how I would want the government to be doing things, is set the rules, hold people accountable, but get private industry involved. Okay?
Yeah, Jim, and I'm glad you brought that up because Thomas actually is a healthcare economist. Thomas, what do you think about that? The way that we deal with healthcare in this country, do you consider it to be socialism, especially when you think about the Affordable Care Act? It's bringing the private industry in. But at least in its beginning stages, it was requiring people to get health insurance.
I mean, we have, compared to many other countries, we have very little public or less public involvement. We now have roughly 55% of financing taking place through the public sector for health care. It's lower than other countries, but it's still very high. If you look at the two industries, and this is indicative of socialist problems. If you look at the two industries Americans think we have problems with, education, primary education, I should say, and healthcare, those are where the government is most involved in those industries, essentially. We have, coming back to the caller, we have public education, which you can have public financing of education, but publicly run schools essentially is a disaster because you have no competition. The only thing you need is people living in your neighborhood to get customers to your school essentially, and it's a disaster. And that's why school choice is so important, that we reach beyond mandatory attendance due to where you live. You're buying your house, you're buying your school when you buy your house, and that's, or rent your apartment. That should not be the place. So in general, I think we see the most concern with industries where the public sector is the most involved. We don't see that with private education or private competition in higher education. U.S. universities have the most Nobel Prizes in terms of research activity.
But that also includes public universities in the U.S.
Correct, but they're competing with the private ones, and that's the key, right? So we have a lot of competition between public and private, and that you don't have in other countries where the government has, let's say Sweden. People talk about Sweden as its nirvana. I come from Sweden. I grew up in Sweden. I lived there my 22 first years, essentially. Sweden is walking away from a lot of the socialism that Bernie Sanders and others want us to believe is nirvana, essentially. They have discovered in the early 90s that this is not sustainable to have the government so involved. So they're walking away, even though we hold them up as a role model.
Let's go to Ron, who's calling from Sandy, Utah. Ron, what about you? What does socialism mean to you?
So in socialism, to me, and I do a lot of work with the local municipalities and volunteer work, and with Salt Lake County. And socialism, to me, from what I can see, is the pooling of resources and doing sidewalk, curb, gutter, street lights, repair work like that. And I think people don't understand that the highway you're driving on is social programs. The sidewalk you're walking down is a social program. If it was privatized and everyone had to do their own sidewalk out in front of their house, you would have dirt in some areas, you'd have cement in some areas, you'd have rock in some areas. It wouldn't work. And then when you look at services like police, fire, what we're seeing is we're seeing competitive forces within the county of different municipalities. So a police officer gets hired here, but I can go make $5 more an hour at this city. So he leaves there and goes there. And then that city has to raise the pay there. And then the rest of us, we're paying for all of this. And so what we're seeing is this huge competitive network that we're stuck, and we can't choose to have that department come and service us. So we have to pay whatever they're making.
So
us
competition
pay.
among municipalities is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's out of control. So what we need to see is working is pooled resources. If we had one metro police force for all of Salt Lake County or one fire department. We don't need 26 fire departments.
Right.
And it's out of control.
All right, we got that. Ron, thank you very much for that. Micah, what do you think about that from a county worker in Salt Lake County, Utah?
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned things like fire departments and police departments. I don't think very many people listening to this program think that we should live in a society where if you let's say, have a fire in your home and you want to call a fire department, but it turns out that you didn't pay the amount of money that the privatized firefighters charge per year, then they're not going to come to your home and they're not going to put out your fire. And to go further with that example, if you live in an apartment building like me, if my apartment were to catch on fire, it would have a strong impact on the other people who live around me. My neighbors next door would be affected by the fire. We have decided in this country that if you have a fire in your apartment, we have made a collective public investment into firefighting as a public good because we care about you as an individual. We don't want you to be affected by fires. And we also don't want we don't want to live in a society where fires are allowed to burn for people who didn't decide to pay into the service for the privatized fire corporation. And there are many examples like this across the society that I think your listeners would agree with. I mean, the sidewalks is an example like that. I don't think that this should be something that is run by individualized people who choose to make an investment in a certain kind of sidewalk or not. We can choose collectively together that we're going to invest in sidewalks. I mean, this is some of the very most basic stuff that is at the root of the Democratic.
All right, I'm going to sneak one more call in, and it's going to be Danielle in Boston, Massachusetts. Danielle, go ahead briefly. Your thoughts on socialism.
Hi, so I believe that socialism, as you guys have been saying, is freedom of choice within companies. But I do want to add one caveat to that. My generation, Gen Z, is very pro-socialism, but I think the cost of that isn't talked about is convenience. I think that if we really want socialism of fair wages, ethical consumption, stake in companies, you aren't going to have a Starbucks on every corner, and that's okay. So while I am for socialism, I think we also need to talk about the cost of convenience that will come with it.
Just briefly, Danielle, why do you think your generation is more interested in socialism and democratic socialism than previous?
I think two reasons: we didn't experience the Cold War, and neither did our parents, so we're multiple generations removed from the fear that it caused. And also because I think we have grown up in a system that we've been told our whole lives we will never be able to buy a home, we will never be able to pay off our student loans. There's just so much hopelessness about there is no other option, and capitalism has failed us so completely that we're looking for any alternative.
Thank you so much for calling in, Danielle. And Tomas Philipson, let me just go back to you finally about that. I'm glad we got a Gen Z caller because it's true that among Gen Z, socialism is much more popular. What do you think about that?
Well, I think a very, very important point here that she mentioned is that they have not really lived through the experience of the adverse effects of socialism, and not necessarily living in socialist country, but seeing it across the world. I mean, we see sort of dictatorship versions of centralized control, and what that does to collapse of countries such as Venezuela is a very, very good example, which was one of the richest Latin American countries and just went down the tube with centralized control essentially. But I think the overall issue with this generation that is very important is that you need to separate sort of the intention of your policy versus the actual effects of that policy. We can have very, very good intentions in having a socialist policy. That doesn't mean that will happen when you institute those policies. Right. So if we had a policy, everyone should have the same income no matter what you do, we would have no income because people don't behave that way, that they put in a lot of work if they don't increase their income.
We got to leave it there, Tomas Philipson, but thank you so much. Tomas Philipson, economist at the University of Chicago. We've also been speaking with Micah Uetricht, who's an editor at Jacobin magazine. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can continue this conversation by calling us or emailing us anytime.
Yes, our number is 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can go to listentothemiddle.com to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter, which is now on Substack.
And next week will be a year into Trump's second term. We want to know how his policies are impacting you personally. That's next week on The Middle. Thanks for listening. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you then.